Chapter 7 The end of days. Through my eyes, for the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days which were before the flood they were eating and drinking, they were marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Matthew 24:37-39 I've been asked hundreds if not thousands of times when I see this world coming to an end. It's interesting that rarely does anyone ask how I see it ending. The question is simply when, as if the only real issue is whether or not it's time to start packing, or stop bothering to pay our bills, or to cancel our magazine subscriptions. And I suppose that's why, while I consider the end of days to be an endlessly intriguing subject, I avoid discussing it at length during television and personal appearances. I refuse to indulge the idea that the end of days is something we should obsess about and panic about and throw ourselves around the room about. I don't believe it's possible to live the lives we came here to live while being perpetually braced to die. We've discussed in previous chapters the many different years in which the world will definitely end, from the 1st century after Christ's crucifixion to the many predictions of the Millwrights, the Mayan calendar's projection of 2012, Sir Isaac Newton's precisely calculated 2060, Nostradamus's prophecy of AD 3797, et.al. We've talked about the tragic consequences of letting fear of the end lead to homicidal and suicidal panic orchestrated by sociopathic frauds. If nothing else, I hope the message has come through loud and clear that there have been far too many wasted lives, and too much wasted anxiety, over an event I believe we're actually going to create for ourselves. An overview of the end of days. As a psychic, I can see clearly through the end of this century. Beyond that, nothing. It's as if sometime during the year 2100, the lights go out not for the planet, but for us humans, who will have succeeded in making Earth uninhabitable in the next 92 years or so. And it's true, the Earth itself won't be destroyed at the end of days. There's not a meteor shower out there with our name on it. The Earth isn't going to explode from a catastrophically overheated core, and it's not going to drift out of its orbit too far from the Sun to sustain life. From ancient civilizations to today's experts, we've been warned over and over and over again, if we don't take care of this sacred home we've been given, it won't be able to provide us with shelter, food, and comfort any longer, just as surely as a house we abuse and neglect will be condemned as unfit for human habitation sooner or later. The next 92 years, it's going to be an interesting century, that's for sure, full of soaring highs and crushing lows, brilliant advances and inevitable steps backward, turbulent chaos and almost unprecedented peace as the countdown to the end of days proceeds. Before I begin a breakdown of what lies ahead in the first 42 years and the last 50 years of this century, I do want to offer a word of caution to our present and future presidential candidates. Sometime between 2008 and 2020 I see a sitting president dying in office of a heart attack. The vice president who assumes the presidency will stun the world by announcing his intention to declare war on North Korea in light of his accurate belief that they actually are in possession of weapons of mass destruction. His efforts to rally congressional and international support for this declaration of war will be resoundingly unsuccessful and the source of enormous alarm, and he'll be assassinated before his term ends. On a more positive note, before the end of 2010, to the chagrin of countless pharmaceutical companies, the common cold will be a thing of the past. I don't know the specifics, but the cure will involve heat, day. There's a small self-contained cubicle that will become a common fixture in most clinics and doctors' offices. At the first hint of a cold, patients will step into this cubicle for 5 or 6 minutes, where a combination of its precisely elevated temperature, an antibiotic vapor, and their own body heat will destroy the rhinitis germ that causes most colds, many allergies, and a variety of asthma-related illnesses. Speaking not just as a psychic but also as a victim of my share of colds every year, let me just assure medical and scientific researchers and pharmaceutical companies around the world that there's a massive fortune to be made for whoever invents, perfects, and secures the patent on this cubicle. And now, with those 2 special alerts out of the way, here are the broad strokes of the upcoming 92 years as I see them now. But never underestimate our power to influence the future, for better or worse, so don't even think about taking these forecasts as an excuse to sit back, put your feet up, and stop trying. For most of us, this is our last visit to Earth. Let's not set ourselves up for an eternity of wishing we'd made more of a difference while we were here. 2010 to 2050. The 21st century is going to usher in the arrival of an extraordinary flood of highly advanced spirits from the other side. In the next chapter we'll discuss why that's true. For now, it's worth mentioning because of the great strides we have to look forward to in the areas of childbirth and infant care. The timing is no coincidence. We're preparing for those highly advanced spirits by seeing to it that we give them the best start on Earth we can possibly offer. By 2010 we're going to see some brilliant leaps forward in the field of diagnosing deficiencies and illnesses in the fetus, thanks to vastly improved ultrasound and amniocentesis. Fetal surgeries will be so precise that they'll be able to correct those deficiencies and illnesses as well as many birth defects and genetic challenges. There will also be fetal injections to guarantee nutritional balances and healthy immune systems before our future children are even born. Inspired by our ancestors' routine practice of accepting the help of gravity during childbirth, 2010 will also see the re-emergence of birthing chambers, for the benefit of both mothers and newborns. These birthing chambers will involve a pulley system allowing the mother to give birth while suspended from strong padded overhanging straps. The baby drops down, as gravity always intended, into soft sterile pillows that are waiting in the hands of the doctors, nurses, and/or midwives in attendance. The walls of the small circular birthing chambers will act as screens on which calming imagery of the mother's choosing will be projected. Gentle music and the sound of quiet waves will accompany the imagery. Lights will be dimmed, and aromatherapy will be put to subtle use. The experience will be more reverent than clinical, a far less jarring transition for the infant from the other side to Earth and a far more considerate event for the mother. Immediately after the child is born, a routine series of blood tests will reveal any protein and chemical imbalances that will by then be known to cause a whole array of psychological disorders, so that everything from depression to potential schizophrenia will be addressed at birth. Cells will also be painlessly harvested from inside the infant's cheek, to serve 2 purposes. The first, over the objections of the ACLU, will be to register the child's DNA in what will eventually be an international databank of every person on Earth. The benefits to the immediate tracking of lost, missing, abandoned, and exploited children, an equally quick resolution of paternity issues and crime solving will far outweigh any privacy concerns. DNA fingerprints will be discreetly imprinted on identification, school and hospital records, social security cards, driver's licenses, credit cards, etc., that can be scanned for authenticity as easily as barcodes are scanned now, and identity theft will eventually become an archaic crime. The second purpose in harvesting and preserving infants' cells at birth has to do with the brilliant advancements in cloning we can look forward to by around 2025. Having a few cells on hand will make it possible to clone a new organ to replace one that has failed, so that the agonizing wait for organ donors and the obscene practice of selling organs on the black market will be distant memories. Last but not least, on the subject of childbirth, sometime around 2010, hospitals will begin saving and carefully preserving placentas. For a great cause, it will be discovered in the next few years that a protein complex or nutrient of some kind in the placenta can slow the progress of Alzheimer's disease. By the way, in case it hasn't become apparent already, the late 2007 breakthrough in which skin cells are being programmed to mimic embryonic stem cells is every bit as much of a miracle as it seems, if not more so. Not only will it lead to a thrilling explosion of cures for previously incurable illnesses, strokes, and paralysis, but by 2012 it will also result in the ability to exchange old body parts for compatible new ones, from spinal cords to limbs to burned or cancerous skin. There's no way to narrow this down to a specific year, but please be aware that as the century progresses, there will be increasing numbers of infertile women and men whose sperm counts are too low to produce children. Countless biological theories will be pursued, but none of them will solve the mystery. Instead, the very simple explanation can be found on the other side. As the end of days closes in, fewer and fewer spirits will choose to reincarnate and be around when life on Earth ceases to exist. The fewer the spirits wanting to come here, the fewer the fetuses they'll need to occupy. And the fewer the fetuses required, the fewer the pregnancies. What's interesting, and comforting, is that along with the diminished number of successful pregnancies, couples will find themselves less and less interested in having children. Their conscious minds may not understand why that is, but their spirit minds will be well aware that they charted themselves to be here at this extraordinary time when spirits choosing to be born on Earth will become scarce and the population at the end of days will be dramatically diminished. Here's the good news. During the first 50 years of the 21st century, we're going to see the end of some of the most insidious diseases and afflictions of our time. Cancer will be destroyed by injecting highly addictive drugs specifically into the nuclei of cancerous cells, which will ultimately result in the cancerous cells consuming and eradicating themselves to satisfy their addiction. I once thought this form of treatment would be in use by at least a handful of exceptional oncologists, if only on an experimental basis, no later than 2006. I don't see it happening now until about 2010. Also in 2010, diabetes will be significantly reduced and ultimately cured through brilliant advancements in the use of proteins. Microchips implanted in the base of the brain will restore healthy signals between the brain, the muscular system, and the neurological system, putting an end to paralysis and Parkinson's disease no later than 2012. In about 2013 or 2014, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, MS, and ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, will be defeated through some highly specialized use of the human growth hormone. The year 2014 will see the introduction of a safe, healthy pill or capsule that will replace gastric bypass and lap band surgeries, and anorexia and bulimia will be eliminated by a newly discovered medication that targets the pituitary gland. In 2015 there will be virtually no invasive surgery. Instead, laser surgery, which of course is already being used with great success, will be brilliantly enhanced by a computerized sensor that will be able to pinpoint, analyze, and take appropriate medical action on the area in question. Blindness will become a thing of the past by 2020 at the latest, without a reliance on organ transplants, when a tiny digital device is discovered that, when implanted in the frontal lobes of the brain, will create or reactivate normal, healthy communication between the brain and the eyes. No later than 2020, thanks to the development of a synthetic material that perfectly duplicates the human eardrum, we'll see a virtual end to deafness. One of the 21st century's most significant medical breakthroughs will be the perfection of synthetic blood in about 2025. It will be universal in type, enhanced with nutritional and immune system supplements, and easily manufactured so that there will always be a safe, healthy, plentiful blood supply for transfusions. The really dire bad news for health won't make its appearance until late in the second half of the century, which we'll discuss several pages from now. The only really alarming developments in the first half will be far outweighed by the advancements I've just described, but they're worth mentioning. A bacterial infection resembling the flesh-eating disease of several years ago will arrive in 2010, transmitted to humans by almost microscopic mites undetectably imported on exotic birds. Known medications and antibiotics will be completely ineffective against this fungus-like, extremely contagious disease, and its victims will be quarantined until it's discovered that the bacteria can be destroyed through some combination of electrical currents and extreme heat. In around 2020, a severe pneumonia-like illness will spread throughout the globe, attacking the lungs and the bronchial tubes and resisting all known treatments. Almost more baffling than the illness itself will be the fact that it will suddenly vanish as quickly as it arrived, attack again 10 years later, and then disappear completely. Strides in mental health in the first half of this century will be extraordinary, virtually eliminating the majority of the disorders that plague society today. And if we want to create a more productive, more successful, more peaceful, better educated world in which crime is an anomaly rather than the norm, we should solve the mysteries of ADHD, OCD, depression, bipolarism, and schizophrenia, and we'll be well on our way. Earlier we discussed the fact that newborn infants will be tested and treated for chemical imbalances that might lead to future psychological problems. That will be true for children, adolescents, and adults as well. No later than the end of 2009, there will be very precise formulas describing which imbalances will cause which problems, and which treatments will be most effective in solving them. We'll see an end to the liberal, often careless prescribing of Ritalin and antidepressants with no blood tests at all to indicate whether those medications are even appropriate. Instead, links will be discovered between specific psychological disorders and specific protein deficiencies, so that when those deficiencies are pinpointed and addressed with precision, the disorders will permanently disappear. By 2013 we're going to see an amazing development in the treatment of mental illness. There will be a device, used exclusively by highly trained psychiatrists and neurologists, that will employ electromagnetic impulses to treat and often cure these brain malfunctions. This device will glide slowly and smoothly across the surface of the skull, much like an MRI, both horizontally and vertically. As it moves, it will detect any abnormalities in the brain, the cerebrospinal fluid that surrounds the brain, blood circulation in and around the brain, and neurological and chemical activity within each hemisphere of the brain and between the two hemispheres, the individual lobes, etc. Details of the scan, with diagnostic readouts, will be monitored by the psychiatric or neurological administrator. When the device senses a disturbance, slow or blocked circulation, for example, or misfiring or dormant neurotransmitters, it emits a series of electromagnetic impulses of varying intensity with pinpoint precision to stimulate the problem area, no matter how microscopic and otherwise undetectable it might be. These treatments on a monthly basis, combined with appropriate medications, will contribute as dramatically to the world of mental health as DNA has contributed to the world of law enforcement, essentially curing everything from bipolar disorder and depression to ADHD, OCD, post-traumatic stress syndrome and chronic anxiety. As for schizophrenia and severe cases of epilepsy, those will be successfully treated in 2014 by a microchip implanted in the brain that will essentially override the system when it detects that any kind of malfunction, misfire, or shutdown is about to happen. This tiny microchip will perform the same function for the brain that the pacemaker performs for the heart, and with equally brilliant success. We have a very substantial drop in the crime rate to look forward to in the next 50 years. One reason for this is the influx of advanced spirits that will be arriving from home as the century progresses, as we'll explain in depth in the next chapter. The other reason is the advancements in law enforcement and forensics that will absolutely thrill every loyal CSI fan. Probably the most dramatic headline is the fact that by 2025 at the latest, law enforcement will have new and expanded databases at their disposal that will make it almost not worth the trouble to commit crimes. SCAN, I have no idea what the letters in that acronym stand for, will be a massive international database of DNA collected from newborn infants and volunteers from the general population. It will be perpetually interactive with the currently existing CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, which is focused on DNA gathered from criminals and crime scenes. The SCAN database will link each person's DNA to such vital personal information as their medical records and their emergency contacts. If it did nothing else but eliminate the all too common tragedy of unidentified murder and other fatality victims, SCAN would be more than worth the forfeiture of privacy. But its ability to instantly identify lost, missing, abandoned, and stolen children will make it a godsend. The SCAN DNA database will actually be fully operational no later than 2015, as will the expanded capabilities of today's Automated Fingerprint Identification System, or AFIS. Added to the tens of millions of fingerprints currently stored and accessible to law enforcement will be full handprints, palm prints, footprints, as singular as fingerprints, it turns out, and prints of the sides of our hands, left behind when we write and almost unavoidably rest the side of our hands on the writing surface. The side of the handprint is unique enough, and will be recognized enough as a valuable forensics tool, that its inclusion in the AFIS database will solve an internationally renowned kidnapping by the end of 2009. In development at the end of 2008 and in full use by worldwide law enforcement no later than 2014 will be a database of the utterly unique fingerprints that are somehow embedded in the iris of the human eye. The day will come when tiny iris scanning devices are installed at every ATM machine, cash register, public building, and airport as a standard, doubly effective security measure. Let's say, for example, that someone manages to steal your ATM card and PIN number. The ATM machine will refuse to dispense cash when the iris scanner is able to tell in less than a second that it has an imposter on its hands. But almost as satisfying, at that instant both a silent alarm and the database will be alerted, and the police will know the identity of the would-be thief within moments of the attempted theft. Most complex and most groundbreaking of the databases in our future, though, will be the voice database that will be perfected and in full international use by 2025. This database will be so highly sensitive that it will be able to detect every tiny detail of pitch, tone, rhythm, dialect, and countless other variables that will someday make each voice on Earth as distinctive as a fingerprint, no matter how many filters, synthesizers, and other voice-altering devices are used. Now, imagine the combined forces of all these databases, as information is immediately transmitted to every airport, train station, bus depot, car rental company, hotel and motel, bank and ATM machine, restaurant and diner and convenience store throughout the world when a criminal is on the run, a child is abducted, or a missing persons case is filed. Database receivers will be as common in public buildings and businesses as surveillance cameras are today, and law enforcement will instantly be alerted when a fingerprint, palm print, hand/side of the hand print, iris print or voice print is recognized by the receiver. Added to this series of coordinated global efforts will be an international version of John Walsh's America's Most Wanted, which will air 7 days a week, 24 hours a day on its own non-profit satellite channel, broadcasting information on every fugitive and every missing person and child to an audience of countless millions in every corner of the world, with corresponding tip lines and websites. While the entire global law enforcement community will be instrumental in initiating and producing this brilliantly successful effort, it will have its real roots in the halls of Scotland Yard. No later than 2014, satellites will be able to detect crimes and send alerts to law enforcement of the specific location where their help is needed. And in case there are no eyewitnesses on the scene, or eyewitness accounts of the crime are inconsistent, as they often are, satellites in orbit for no other purpose will be able to instantly transmit detailed digital footage of a crime scene, the ultimate in discrete surveillance cameras. In the next chapter we'll discuss the extraordinary spiritual unity this planet will experience before the end of days. The seeds of that unity, and of a true global awareness of the God Center in each of us, will be planted in the next 20 years or less, accompanied by some dramatic changes in the world of organized religion. Pope Benedict will be the last elected pope. His reign will be succeeded by a new Catholic practice of selecting a college of cardinals, essentially a triumvirate of popes who will collectively share papal responsibilities. Between 2015 and 2018, a union of Protestant faiths will be organized, finally acting on the fact that there really is strength in numbers, to tackle such worldwide problems as hunger, poverty, homelessness, and the need for universal medical care. By around 2025 the strength in numbers approach will be successful enough to inspire a voluntary coalition of all religions that care to participate. This powerful coalition will be unified by its yearning for more depth and substance in its connection to its Creator, and by its willingness to abandon traditional counterproductive bureaucracy and countless committees and instead take an active, hands-on approach to feeding, clothing, housing, curing, and spiritually nurturing those who need God's heart at work through His children for His children. This 2025 Global Interfaith Coalition will result in the worldwide construction of healing centers, compounds of 4 pyramid-shaped buildings staffed entirely by volunteers and generously equipped with donated supplies, offering around-the-clock food, clothing, shelter, basic personal hygiene and laundry facilities, medical care, crisis counseling, legal aid, and anything and everything else the populations of surrounding communities can't provide for themselves. Of particular significance to the massive spiritual awakening later in this century will be the Healing Center's dedication schools, which will offer, among other things, extensive courses in world religions and will require the completion of each of those courses prior to graduation. By 2040, thanks in large part to these healing centers and efforts inspired by them, we're going to see a great unity of global faiths, based on an educated awareness that their similarities far outnumber their differences, and on the conspicuous impact their combined humanitarian efforts are having on this earth. And as we'll discover in the second half of the century, this unity of faith is only the beginning of a worldwide spiritual transformation. The year 2020 will mark the end of the U.S. presidency and the executive branch of the government. Let's just say the American public will finally be fed up by then and leave it at that. The legislative branch will essentially absorb the responsibilities of the executive branch, with a streamlined body of elected representatives, an equal number from each state, forming the new legislature, which will be known simply as the Senate. The party system of Democrats, Republicans, Independents, etc., will uncomplicate itself into liberals and conservatives, who will debate and vote on each proposed bill and law in nationally televised sessions. Requirements for Senate candidates will be stringent and continuously monitored. For example, senators will be prohibited from having any past or present salaried position with any company that has ever had or might ever have a professional or contractual connection to federal, state, or local government, and each senator must submit to random drug and alcohol testing throughout his or her term. The long-term effects of this reorganized government and closely examined body of lawmakers will be a return of legislative accountability and public trust, and state governments will follow suit no later than 2024 by becoming smaller mirror images of the national Senate. Among the laws that will be enacted during the Senate's first 6-year term will be the flat tax bonuses for those with careers in the arts, education, law enforcement, and public service, national observance of all major holidays celebrated by all major religions, as well as a day of remembrance for Holocaust survivors, victims, and their descendants, neutering of all male and female pedophiles proved guilty by irrefutable evidence as a mandated part of their prison sentence, a public health system driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, even on the first offense, will result in mandated inpatient rehab and detox, and the immediate seizure and auctioning of the vehicle to defray the rehab and detox expenses. As for a couple of other topics of national interest, by 2020 we'll see the end of IRAs, mutual funds, pension and retirement plans, and yes, it's true, the stock market. And hard as it may be to believe at this moment, by the mid-2020s the global image of the United States will be significantly rehabilitated. What's fascinating is that we'll accomplish this by shifting the vast majority of our humanitarian focus back on our own problems and their solutions. We'll evolve into a nation that inspires rather than invades and be admired all the more for it. I think it was in about 1972 that I announced on a San Francisco television show called People Are Talking, we're starting into a polar tilt. I was as surprised by the announcement as the hosts of the show were, especially since I had no idea what a polar tilt was, and rarely has my office been as flooded with calls questioning my sanity as it was after that telecast. It turns out that a polar tilt is a shift in the angle at which the Earth tilts on its axis, toward or away from the Sun, causing all sorts of changes in ocean currents and weather in general. Out of curiosity, my staff and I did a little research and discovered that a 19th-century Scottish scientist named James Croll wrote in 1875 about the climate changes caused by the tilt of the Earth's axis, and Edgar Cayce commented on the polar tilt as well. That having been said, the polar tilt will reach its peak by 2020, in addition to which, in around 2018 worldwide seismic activity will result in a rash of volcanoes and earthquakes. The resulting atmospheric dust will create enough pollution to cause disastrous crop failures in the early 2020s. Rains approaching monsoon intensity will hit the eastern seaboard of North and South America in about 2025. Between 2025 and 2030, dramatic tidal waves will hit the Far East and Florida. The Florida tsunamis will be the result of an unprecedented swarm of hurricanes. In around 2026, a series of powerful tsunamis will crash into Japan. As a result of this major oceanic disturbance, a new land mass will emerge among the Hawaiian Islands. The year 2029 will usher in a rash of meteor showers and the unceremonious return to Earth of some of the trash and debris we've abandoned during our space explorations. Fortunately, considerably more damage will be done to our topography and plant life than to our human and animal life. Before the year 2050, I absolutely believe that in the wake of major volcanic and subterranean disturbances in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, both Atlantis and Lemuria will rise magnificently from their underwater graves. Later in this chapter we'll discuss the atmospheric, topographical, and climatic circumstances that will make all the difference in the world, so to speak, in the second half of the century, and essentially leave it up to us just how quickly the end of days will come. No later than 2015 all newly built houses will be solar-powered and prefabricated, made of stone or flame-retardant synthetic wood over reinforced steel, with roofs of ceramic tile and solar panels that are both shatterproof and fireproof. Standard in each home will be a sophisticated security system, including steel core exterior doors and unbreakable windows that can be opened only by the home's central computer, in an emergency triggered by an alarm that simultaneously alerts the fire and police departments, and by the homeowner through a scan of their eyeprint. The eyeprint will be a configuration of the cornea and iris, as distinctive as a fingerprint, much like we discussed regarding the iris fingerprint database. All access points of the house will include a peephole, which the residents and authorized guests will look into so that the central computer can scan the eyeprint and allow entry. That same central computer can be programmed to play music, turn TVs and other home computers on and off, control appliances and lighting, and completely manage the phone system, making voice-activated calls, blocking calls, selectively answering calls, and providing a crystal clear, hands-free conversation in any room or rooms of the house. Building codes for every home, and public building, for that matter, will mandate powerful, well-concealed air purifiers, eliminating virtually all airborne viruses and sources of allergies and asthma attacks. And another common fixture in most upscale homes by 2015 will be highly functional and incredibly convenient robots. They'll be available to the general public by 2019 and will respond to more than 500 complicated voice commands, from cooking to cleaning to pet care to reading bedtime stories to helping children with their homework to teaching computer skills. Last but certainly not least, it will be a very rare private home that by 2040 won't be equipped with a retractable roof to allow the family hovercrafts to come and go as routinely as the family cars currently come and go from our garages. Protecting ourselves from terrorists and unsafe air will become an increasingly urgent priority as technology advances, with the result that by the late 2020s some of us will be living in domed cities. The concept of domed cities will be developed by an international collaboration of experts. The first of these cities will appear in the United States. Germany, England, and Japan will follow immediately, with India, the Middle East, and the Far East being the last to participate. Eventually there will be domed cities on every continent, made of a composite of 3-ply synthetic glass and plastic that's infinitely more durable than anything in existence today. It will be tinted for UV protection but still high enough and clear enough to be virtually undetectable to the population thriving beneath it, and it will open and close to allow, or deny, air travel. The air will be purified, the temperature will be regulated, and all conditions in general will be scientifically controlled for maximum health. Ironically, the downside of domed cities will be their desirability. The more ideal they become, the more crowded they'll become, and the more crowded they become, the more stressful they'll become. It will take only a couple of decades for the population of domed cities to be weeded out as the wealthy take over and the poor are excluded. That inequity will be solved to some extent by the appearance of several domed rural regions throughout the world. Communal societies will form there and become very successful organic agricultural centers. Not until the second half of the century will the novelty and environmental purity of domed living lose much of its appeal, and the general population will venture out into the real world again, leaving domed cities much less crowded, much more affordable, and much less in demand. Of course, as always, our greatest hope for the finest possible quality of life in the coming century, and for any chance of postponing or averting the end of days, is a brilliantly educated generation or two who can succeed in the many areas in which we've either failed or fallen short. By approximately 2020, the educational system in the United States will undergo massive structural changes, and not a moment too soon. Teachers will be well paid, they'll be subjected to thorough background checks, and they'll be required to hold degrees in child psychology in addition to their teaching credentials, since children's educational and emotional needs will be considered to be of equal importance. Higher salaries for teachers will attract more teachers, and in 2020 there will never be more than 15 grade school students per teacher in any classroom. Elementary school children will study the usual reading, writing, spelling, math, and social studies, as well as nutrition, basic ethics, an art or music course, a foreign language course, and an active, hands-on course in ecology. No child will graduate from 6th grade without knowing how to read and write, and chronic tardiness, absences, or incomplete homework assignments will be considered the fault of the parents, not the children, resulting in a combination of fines and requisite parenting classes. Middle schools and high schools will involve students linked by laptop to assigned teachers at education centers throughout each state. Teachers and students can instantly access each other with the push of a button, making truancy a breeze to detect and the overseeing of each student's work far more individualized than it is now. Tests in each subject will be given every 3 months, locally, administered by live graduate students in the teaching curriculum. As for higher education, every student will have instant cyberspace access to the application process at every college and university around the world, just as every college and university will have the instant cyberspace ability to recruit students from around the world. It will become the norm for college students to attend schools overseas, and as this century progresses it will be higher education that's the primary force, along with the great coalition of religions we discussed earlier, behind the eventual formation of a true global community. From 2050 to the end of days and beyond there will be human life on Earth again, millions and millions of years from now, when this planet has had the opportunity to cleanse itself of our presence here. And the rest of that thought is, unless every one of us does everything we can, every single day, to save the earth. This earth, this home away from home, is God's creation, not ours. It was here before we were, and it will outlast us if we don't get over this arrogant idea that we're entitled to live here. Sometimes you'd think that we're all a bunch of teenagers, left unsupervised in the house while our parents are away. Given enough time and freedom, there won't be a house left worth living in, and, I promise, the same is true of our treatment of this planet. We need to focus on the biggest possible picture to get a perspective on the facts that will determine our success or failure in the second half of this century, and whether or not it will culminate in the end of our days on Earth. Appearances can be deceiving, after all. For example, from our point of view, it can seem very much as if our planet is the center of the universe, with the sun, moon, stars, and distant galaxies revolving around us. But the truth is, we're just one of 8 planets, many of them much larger than we are, that revolve around the sun. There are countless other suns in the cosmos providing heat, light, and life to their own solar systems, and there are far more solar systems and far more galaxies than our most brilliant astronomers have begun to imagine yet. Similarly, convenient and comforting as it can be to look out our windows and assume that if everything looks fine, everything must be fine, we're doing ourselves a great disservice to ignore the problems we've created and that we must solve if life on Earth is going to continue into the next century. For example, because we humans can get very busy being smug about our superiority and dominion on Earth, and our indestructibility no matter how we abuse this planet, I think it's worth paying at least a moment's thought to an issue brought up in a fascinating article called "How Will the World End?", written by Herbert C. Fife for Pearson's magazine in July of 1900. In that article, Mr. Fife points out, countless ages ago in the world's past history there was a time when huge monsters, both on land and sea, were common. These reigned supreme for a time, only to succumb at length and disappear. Many species even within our own time have become extinct. Can man then always hope to have the preeminence? When once a type is gone, said the late Mr. J. F. Nesbitt, nature never renews it. So infinite are her resources that no pattern, no number of patterns, matters. And it may be that man, a late arrival, is destined to a far shorter use of the earth than the cockroach or the lobster. Not over-flattering to human vanity, but nevertheless true. The fact is, we know little about the origin of diseases, and why at certain seasons certain epidemics arise. The bacillus of plague, of influenza, of cholera, of typhoid, or any other disease propagated by germs, finds that the climatic or atmospheric conditions are favorable, and promptly proceeds to multiply, and, once it had a free run, it could destroy the entire human race in a month. We might try to take comfort in the fact that this article was written more than a century ago, but it's worth asking ourselves how much has changed on the points Mr. Fife is raising. We humans still absolutely believe we're the most superior species on this planet, and I guess if most superior means most destructive, a case can be made. But isn't it silly, really, that while we're busy driving other species to extinction, we've overlooked the distinct possibility that we're driving ourselves to extinction at the same time, with the same careless neglect and demolition of the very planet we rely on for survival? What has given us the impression that we're not every bit as vulnerable, if not more so, as every other earthly species, especially when we look at the long list of fatal human diseases we can't seem to conquer? And if correcting that misguided impression helps us to wake up and start paying serious attention to the well-being of this earth, then so much the better, and God bless Mr. Fife. Global warming. I'm telling you this as a psychic, as a concerned citizen of the world, as an extensive traveler who's personally seen 60-million-year-old glaciers melting off the Alaskan coast, and as a grandmother whose greatest wish is that my grandchildren's grandchildren will be born on a planet in which they can thrive. Global warming. The gradual, alarming increase in temperatures during the last century is a potentially fatal threat to Earth. That's a fact, no matter how you feel about Al Gore, and no matter whether you're a tree-hugging hippie or a right-wing conservative. And if we don't take it seriously and do something about it today, it will become one of the primary factors in creating an uninhabitable world 92 years from now. I can tell you with psychic certainty that the landscape of this planet at the end of days will be the same continents we have now, each of them severely diminished by flooding. 2/3 of the Earth is currently covered by water. By the end of this century, water will cover 3/4 of the planet as ice caps, glaciers, and snow from the highest mountains continue to melt. Most of the melting ice will flow into the oceans, drowning coastal cities and driving the population toward the middle of the continents. What doesn't melt into the seas will seep into the earth, to its red-hot core, creating steam and pressure, which will in turn cause a rash of catastrophic volcanoes around the world. Mount Lassen, Mount St. Helens, and Mount Etna will be among the first to erupt, but even the dormant Mount Fuji will come to life again no later than 2085, decimating much of Japan. Contributing to the atmospheric violence of the last 3 decades of this century will be an array of weather extremes that will make our current climate look ordinary. Hurricanes and monsoons will more than double in frequency and intensity. The average heat and cold record temperatures throughout the world will be a minimum of 10 degrees hotter than they are now. Tornadoes will become destructive year-round threats, rather than seasonal, throughout the Central, North and South American continents and in areas of Europe and Africa once thought to be topographically immune from them. And where flooding isn't prevalent, drought will be, so that it will become virtually impossible to find a healthy, profitable place to live, let alone a safe one. Yes, all thanks to global warming. So how dare any of us ignore it or trivialize it, when it's literally the difference between life and death for humankind. A major contributor to global warming is the infamous greenhouse effect, a term we've heard so often that I'm not sure we even pay attention to it anymore. And believe me, we need to. I certainly don't pretend to have a background in science or the slightest bit of expertise, but as I understand it, the greenhouse effect is caused by atmospheric gases, particularly carbon dioxide, methane, and ozone. At ground level, ozone is a polluting form of oxygen. They retain and reflect the sun's energy back to Earth to keep us warm. If it weren't for the basic greenhouse effect, this planet would probably be nothing but solid ice. The danger we're increasingly creating is really an enhanced greenhouse effect, in which too much carbon dioxide, methane, and ozone are filling the air, so that too much energy from the sun is being retained and reflected back to Earth, with the result that we keep on getting warmer and warmer. So a key to the solution to global warming is the reduction of the amount of carbon dioxide, methane, and ozone we're allowing to be released into the atmosphere, through the burning of fossil fuels like coal and oil, for example. And eliminating vast areas of trees and other foliage dramatically compounds the problem, since plants take in carbon dioxide and give off oxygen, helping to reduce carbon dioxide from the air without our having to lift a finger. In other words, and further rewarding us with oxygen, without which we cannot survive. Ozone as a pollutant at ground level is obviously not to be confused with the essential ozone layer, which forms a thin shield in the upper atmosphere that protects life on Earth from the sun's ultraviolet rays. As far back as the 1980s, scientists began gathering evidence that the ozone layer was being depleted, exposing us to potential radiation and the related possibility of skin cancer, eye damage, and harm to the immune system. NASA has even begun monitoring holes in the ozone layer, commonly called holes but actually specific areas of extreme thinning or depletion. And in this case the primary culprit is CFC, a man-made gas called chlorofluorocarbon, which for decades was popularly used in spray cans and refrigerators. In the year 2000, 120 countries around the world agreed to phase out the use of CFC. Sadly, while the ozone layer is capable of repairing itself if no further harm is inflicted on it to exacerbate the damage, the healing process is guaranteed to be very slow. Chlorine, which is one of the components of chlorofluorocarbon, has amazing durability in the atmosphere, and it just takes one atom of chlorine to destroy 100,000 molecules of ozone. Add all of this up and we've got a planet that's slowly being warmed to the point of cataclysmic flooding and violent weather events because of extreme levels of greenhouse gases and an ozone layer too diminished to dilute the sun's radiation and harmful effects on those greenhouse gases. Rather than preserving and enhancing our global forests, we're clearing them out to create toilet paper and housing developments, eliminating some of our greatest silent allies in providing oxygen and cleansing the air of excess carbon dioxide. And every one of those interacting elements that's leading the Earth to potential uninhabitability is caused by us. Tragically, we've become a cancer here, sending species after species of animals into extinction and apparently forgetting that we humans are every bit as vulnerable to extinction as any other species on Earth. I've heard the same Go Green public service announcements you have, and seen the same bumper stickers. But too often there's no follow-up explanation about what going green means or exactly why it makes a difference. I also hate to admit it, but I tend to have an aversion to activist slogans like Go Green. Unfairly, I'm sure, it makes me feel excluded unless I have time to pick up a sign and head to Washington, and God bless every one of you who demonstrates for important causes, and it also implies that all of us know what it is we're supposed to do about it. I didn't know, but I've made it my business to find out so that I really can do something about it, and so that I can share the information with you. I'm not advocating these suggestions because they're just plain nice, planet-friendly things to do. I'm advocating them, and implementing them myself, because it actually is up to us to either resign ourselves to the end of life on Earth at the end of this century or see to it that we have many more centuries to enjoy and appreciate this beautiful home away from home. And yes, it truly is this simple: use only recycled paper. Why? Because it saves the atmosphere about 5 pounds of carbon dioxide per ream of paper. Set your thermostat just 2 degrees warmer in the summer than you're accustomed to and 2 degrees cooler in the winter. Why? Because those tiny adjustments will keep approximately 2,000 pounds of carbon dioxide per year. Don't run your dishwasher until it's completely full. Why? Because it will save the atmosphere about 100 pounds of carbon dioxide per year. Pick the 3 lamps you use most in your house and change the bulbs to easily accessible compact fluorescent bulbs. Why? Because you'll eliminate an extra 300 pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere every year. Adjust the heat on your water heater to a maximum of 120 degrees, and have it insulated. Why? Because it saves 1,550 pounds of carbon dioxide from the air every year. Reduce the duration of your showers by 2 to 3 minutes. Why? Because 350 pounds of carbon dioxide will be saved every year thanks to less water needing to be heated. Check your tires every month to make sure they're properly inflated. Why? Because it will save 250 pounds of carbon dioxide per year. Change your heating and air conditioning filters, or clean them, as often as recommended. Why? Because it will keep the units from having to work harder than they're designed to work to keep you comfortable, as well as keeping an extra 350 pounds of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere per year. Turn your computer off rather than letting it sleep, and unplug electronics when you're not using them. Why? Because it will save a minimum of 1,200 pounds of carbon dioxide per year. Take care of the simple chore of caulking and weather stripping your exterior doors and windows. Why? Because not only will you be more comfortable all year long, but you'll also eliminate 1,700 pounds of carbon dioxide per year. Plant a tree, or have one planted by an organization like Tree People, in honor of a lost loved one. Why? Because you'll be adding more oxygen to the atmosphere and saving an amazing 2,000 pounds of carbon dioxide. Those simple adjustments alone add up to a saving of 9,500 pounds of carbon dioxide per person per year. If you need a little more motivation to be convinced, they'll also save you about $2,000 every year. And a few more suggestions for today or the near future, since they're not necessarily as simple, or affordable, as the above list. As you replace old appliances, buy new ones that bear an Energy Star label, designed to save both carbon dioxide emissions and money. Making sure the walls and ceilings of your home are well insulated can save a minimum of 2,000 pounds of carbon dioxide, not to mention hundreds of dollars every year. Changing single-pane windows to double-pane windows conserves energy, saves a fortune in power bills, and eliminates an amazing 10,000 pounds of carbon dioxide. Switching from your current shower head to a low-flow shower head will save approximately 350 pounds of carbon dioxide and an average of around $200 per year. When it's time for a new car, remember that a hybrid will save almost 17,000 pounds of carbon dioxide and $3,800 per year. Even a more fuel-efficient car will save thousands and thousands of pounds of carbon dioxide and thousands of dollars at the same time. By the way, since the paper industry is the third largest contributor to global warming factors, seek out toilet paper, facial tissues, and paper towels and coffee filters that are made from recycled paper. Recycle magazines, newspapers, and paper grocery bags. Give your dry cleaner a garment bag to use for your dry cleaning to encourage them to get rid of all that annoying extra paper and plastic, and never drop off dry cleaning without returning those equally annoying wire hangers. And on the subject of annoying, I'm sure it would horrify all of us to see how many landfills are piled with styrofoam cups, since about 25 billion of them are thrown away every year. Plastic bags from the market are a little more recyclable than styrofoam, but not much. Paper or glass cups and mugs make drinks taste better than styrofoam does, don't you think? As for all the debris left over from trips to the store, washable canvas shopping bags eliminate that so conveniently. Again, I wouldn't carry on for quite so long on this subject if it weren't literally a matter of life and death. of whether or not we'll ever live on this earth again once we've gone home. We caused these problems, and it's our job to clean them up. And while we're at it, let's pray every single day that it's not already too late. Our health at the end of days, we obviously can't be healthy in an atmosphere that isn't. So when I say that illness is what's going to ultimately end our lives on earth, please understand that I'm not really making a distinction between the fatal diseases in our future and the disastrous environment we're in the process of creating. I can't stress enough that when the end of times comes, these disease-related deaths will be amazingly easy and peaceful. Spirituality will be so commonly understood by then that people will know exactly what perfect joy awaits them on the other side, that they'll essentially just step out of their bodies and into the tunnel, fearless and full of hope. I can't help but be fondly reminded of 3 of my ministers who went home in the last year and a half. Each of them, when they passed a few months apart, was found in bed, lying peacefully on their backs with their hands folded on their chests. Their deaths were clearly as graceful, confident, and God-centered as could be. And with only the most rare exceptions, the result of what will by then be an almost unheard of act of violence. That's what death will be like for everyone at the end of times. Ironically, in the first half of this century, we're going to see the majority of today's most devastating diseases eradicated. Cancer, leukemia, diabetes, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, ALS, Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, all of those will be so long gone by 2050 that they'll seem almost archaic. And yet the medical world will be caught completely off guard when, in about 2075 or 2080, there will be a sudden worldwide spread of diseases that seem almost archaic to us today, particularly polio and smallpox. We've become complacent and stopped vaccinating against those 2 disastrous illnesses in particular, and some combination of that complacency and the unhealthy atmosphere we've created will give them the perfect opportunity to reappear. The environment will take its toll on our immune systems, there's no doubt about it. It's karmic, really, the Earth's way of paying us back for all the abuse and neglect. Still another reason we've got to start treasuring and nurturing this planet if we ever expect it to do the same for us again. There will be dramatic increases in fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, sterility and infertility, and countless, virtually untraceable allergies. It's probably also a form of payback that we'll be more vulnerable than ever to diseases carried by unhealthy animals, from currently unheard of bird flus and variations of Lyme disease to a deadly relative of West Nile virus that will arrive via insects from South America. These illnesses and plagues will hit hard and very suddenly, much more quickly than scientists and researchers can keep up with them, let alone conquer them. And that, sadly, along with a toxic atmosphere and having nowhere to live that's not disastrously flooded and weather challenged, is what will bring us to the end of our lives on Earth. Not a nuclear holocaust when all is said and done. No world leader will be insane enough to actually push that legendary red button. Not a collision with some monster asteroid or meteor shower, a fatal, haphazard whim of the cosmos. Just our own self-created, self-fulfilled prophecy of the end of days. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. T.S. Eliot.